Hey everyone, thank you for joining with us as a community today and sharing with us. My name is Robert Ford and I live here in beautiful Colorado. I work with Heliospectra as a regional sales manager focused on Central West US and Canada. I'm quite happy about this series of webinars and we're wonderful, very happy that you could all join us here online today. The challenges that COVID presents us with are very real, and we're all dealing with this in different ways. In that, I believe we can choose how we adapt to these challenges. Do we operate out of fear, or are we taking the opportunity to learn and grow through what we're faced with? We choose to grow and adapt, and it's clear that you are as well by participating in new ways. One of the ways that we can do that is connecting online and sharing what we can. And webinars was one of the best ways that we could think to reach as many people as we could in a community sense. I'm especially excited about today's event because we're taking a more advanced look into some growing practices with a panel of phenomenally talented people. Everyone you'll hear today is experienced in ramping up and operating advanced facilities. And as we dive into it all, I believe you'll find you'll learn a lot from their perspectives. We're all in this for the plant, and we made these webinars to connect our communities and foster a collective knowledge. With that, I'd like to introduce Christine Champagne.
Christine, you might be on mute.
Mute works. Good news.
There we go. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Robert. I'm here in the New England area, specifically Connecticut. I've been in controlled environment agriculture for about 30 years as a grower, starting with mom and pop, moving up to 45 acres of commercial grow. The last 7 years specifically concentrating on medical marijuana in the New England region. Been setting up, fine-tuning, dialing in strategies, and this is my topic, reach the full potential of cannabis growth through proven strategies. It's where it's about. And I've learned a lot working with the growers on this panel as well. The first one I'd like to introduce is Ryan Wakow. Ryan?
Hello, everybody. Hola. Hey. Bonjour. Aloha. Just want to get it out there. Sorry if I missed some of you guys. I am Ryan Wakow. I am the cannabis grower liaison for Heliospectra. I am located here currently in my living room, but in Denver, Colorado. I'm a second generation cannabis grower. I ran a facility here in Denver from 2009 to 2015. During that stint, I've been fortunate enough to work with a really excellent group of growers, and during that period of accumulated 3 High Times awards. And I've been fortunate enough to work alongside both of, actually all 3 of the people that are speaking today, including with Christine and then the 2 speakers today. I'm very talented and really looking forward to this webinar, and thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan. Next, I'd like Kevin. Kevin, could you introduce yourself, please?
There we go. All right. So my name is Kevin. I have been I've been in the industry for going on over 20 years. I started my first gig up in Humboldt County. Spent 15 years in Humboldt County until Las Vegas went recreational. At that time, I went down and worked on building the Grove, which is a fairly well-known location in Las Vegas. Cultivation, dispensaries, and developed different systems there, different ideas. We were one of the first large-scale operations to go all LED, and that was a big chunk to pull before anybody had any idea what LEDs really did or anything about spectrum. Now I'm in Central California, working on an operation that's large scale, 78,000 square foot, double tiered with the ability to go 3 tiers. So quite a big project we got going on, and we've got room for 4 more of those buildings if we ever need them.
Thank you, Kevin. Our third panelist is Andrew. Andrew, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Ziegler. I'm the operations manager at Experience Organics. We are a recreational cannabis producer processor located in Eastern Washington in Benton City. I oversee the production, processing, and sale of our product. I work with 207 Elixia fixtures in our indoor facility and have completed about 100 cycles with these lights. My experience growing cannabis started in 2011 in Montana as a medical grower. In 2016, I moved to Washington, where I met the 2-person Experience Organics team as they transitioned from the medical market. We now have 11 employees and are on track for our first phase of expansion later this year, building a 500 light indoor facility. I'm excited to be on this panel, and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, Andrew. As you can see, we're all excited to get started and glad to be here today. Ryan's going to start us off with talking about the best spectrums from different stages of plant growth, and strategies. Ryan?
Yeah, so, when we're talking with growers in the field, and a lot of us, traditional growers come from, the legacy market and, or pre-market, or however we want to call it. And so when we have the ability to use LEDs, we do have the ability to really focus on any sort of spectrum that we want, tailored towards crop growth. And I like to refer for crop growth efficiency. For us, we've always focused on the crop. And the crop does have a unique ability to be able to convert wavelengths of light into what it really needs at that time. But talking with traditional growers, I get them to refer, and a lot of the times we talk about, and they say, spectrum control, it doesn't work, or LEDs don't work, and then relatively when we're trying to talk about the science behind it, there's a lot of lack of science, or the reasons why they are saying it doesn't work, it totally makes sense, but there are certain things that you can change or you should be looking towards when running your LED environment when it comes to warmer environmental temperatures, but also spectrum is super important. So the first thing I get growers to try to understand is, how are you growing in general with your legacy technology? Are you using a metal halide? Are you using a T5 into your vegetative situation, and then going into, using your DE, and then getting into understand, okay, well, why are you using that metal halide in the vegetative stage? Is it because that metal halide provides that little bit of a higher blue spectrum, which we have found just in general, we like the growth off of those. That higher blue spectrum gives us a nice short, compact, squatty plant ready to be put into that flowering room, really tight on actual nodal growth, which is going to give us, larger bud development, typically relates to a larger yield. And then moving into their DE or HPS, and then talking to them, okay, well, why are you transitioning into there? Obviously, you like the flower development off of that. Well, you are transitioning your crop into a red spectrum. So getting those legacy growers to understand that we've all been utilizing spectrum control. Now, the fact that we have LEDs now allows us to really tailor in that spectrum for that specific application during the right time. The spectrum control lights allows you to be able to do that with one fixture. So providing that higher amount of blue light in that vegetative stage, similar to like your, spring conditions, a little larger of that kind of blue light within the atmosphere. And then eventually going into that flowering, your 12-12 light cycle, going into a higher red spectrum, but also then bringing in the far red, and where I think we're going to hear a lot of interesting things with far red and the experience that the other panelists bring to the table. I've got to work with them closely, and I think that we've all got to learn a lot from each other on what are these ideal spectrums for crop growth.
Thank you, Ryan. Yes, I was one of those high pressure sodium legacy growers, and getting past that and learning the efficiency. Kevin's going to help us understand a little bit more about how he utilizes the lights for photosynthesis and secondary metabolites. Kevin?
There we go. Yeah, so, really it's photons, photons, photons. Your plants are really trying to produce, a response to them where you've got, you put photons on the plant, they're producing energy. That really is converting, all your chlorophyll A and B for production. And what we're looking at is in the large industry going full scale. One of the problems we have that differentiates us is different from a small scale grow, where you can really kind of tailor and manipulate your plant at a very small scale. At a large scale facility, it's really difficult because you have one large room, 2 large rooms, 3, however many you've got, and you've got all these different genetics in there. And trying to tailor that is a little bit more difficult. Some plants respond really well to 900 ppfd, some, and they don't like going to that 1200 or 1300. Other plants where you can drive them to 1400, get the best production out of them. So really the way we're looking at things is we try to group plants that are similar, or what we have found to be plants that are similar in growth styles, to try and really tailor those lights down to that plant specific. Different lights react differently. When we first went with the Grove and I was first driving the spectral change LEDs, we had no idea really what we were doing. We were the first group to really go LED large scale, and we didn't really have any knowledge. So the best thing I could do was, my concept was, let's take an LED that I can change all the different spectrums on, and let's try and change it down to what a hide light looks like. And that was kind of really the only thing we had to go on, because there wasn't anybody really doing a lot of research on it. Most of the LEDs I had used prior to that were marginal. So that was one of the reasons we really chose, when we originally went out, we had the heliospectrums because I could change that spectrum. And just driving, now it's just driving photons, and we have so many different types of lights out there these days that it's really interesting to see the science changes and what really drives different metabolites. And yeah, Ryan, you want to chime in on any of that?
I always say it's a tool, not a toy. And you have so much at your fingertips. And I remember those early days at the Grove of just how much you were diving into these, sometimes quite frankly, just out of control lighting experiments. And I always like when you touch on some of that, sometimes for not your own benefit, or the benefit of maybe yield and production facility, which I think is important to always mention.
Yeah, we did a lot of experimenting. So I mean, I ran at the end, I ran reds just to see what would happen. I've ran blues just to see what happened. We've done, all the different things you can do and all the different mistakes you can make. And in the end, generally speaking, I end up with more questions than I have answers typically. So, there's a lot to learn still, I think. I think we're driving a good direction on understanding the different aspects between what does blue do to the plant, what does red do to the plant, what does green do to the plant. For a long time we thought green didn't do anything, and it's very important. So all of it, all the different spectral changes are quite interesting to see.
Yeah, and just to add to Kevin, we had to do so much experimenting, and we still experiment to this day with all the different spectrums. And there's so much to learn, and there's a lot more cannabis-specific research that's going into spectrums out there now, as opposed to the past. But just experimenting and seeing what we can find out. And like you said, Kevin, there's usually more questions than answers, but we're making slow progress. So
It's definitely, you need to experiment with everything and to test your understandings. And yes, I have had every question lead to several more questions, and that's how we're going to figure it out. What type of experiments have you done with the far red?
Well, far red, I mean, we use it. Well, far red, first off, far red is a response, is a most shade areas. If a plant is in the shade under a few trees, it's getting more far red at that time. And that kind of elicits a response to the plant to, hey, I need to stretch and see if I can't overcome whatever's over the top of me or what's around me, to really try and get more light. Really, that's what the plant's trying to do, is get more light. And so when it senses that far red, it starts to elongate, starts to stretch and really get and move out. So early on, we used far red to catch some plants that were shortened, that weren't catching up to the others. We would actually use far red to try and elongate those and try and get an even canopy and manipulate different lights or different areas of lighting to try and manipulate that plant stretch. Same thing in the fall, when that sun angle gets low in the south during the fall, that far red becomes more present in the plant. It also helps, so for eons of time, these plants have been responding to that far red spectrum to elicit flower responses, to elicit stretching response. And so a lot of people now, are finding that, using that far red in that tail end of flower, or when you go into flower, really kind of helps speed up that process. And so we really used far red in that aspect, but I've also used far red at the very end of a cycle just to see what it would do. And, I mean, stress response is a stress response. It's going to elicit secondary metabolites, going to elicit, different aspects of the plant. And so by stressing it with far red, we did find that there's been a lot of research as well that finds that it produces an uptake in gibberellic acid, which reduces certain terpene. So linalool will reduce, myrcene will increase. So it's just really learning what different color changes, what terpene changes, and what different types of genetic changes it can make to those plants. Ryan, you typed in there?
Yeah, I can see my video pop up. I think that, we could probably have a whole session on this. I know I really want Andrew to touch on this topic as well. They utilize some far red in a very unique way. Kevin, touched about that, natural aspect that far red is present in the atmosphere. That's why we insist to growers that they should have far red within a lighting source, that it is very important. The thing with far red is it's measured, outside of far. We are finally, and we still need to get more research with all of these, spectral attributes to cannabis production. And we finally start to have some, good academic professors in the industry that are starting to, focus on cannabis and focus on even changing with far red and having it actually include within the PAR spectrum, because they are finding that far red is just as important as the photons produced in PAR. And like Kevin has mentioned, to take that plant that's growing underneath that shade tree and to take it a step farther for all of the growers for you to be able to relate to. It's even in your HPS room, you go in one day and you have this huge massive fan leaf, and you have your top, and that plant, especially in that early flowering stage, is growing right up underneath that fan leaf. Now, plants naturally don't soak up all the light, and what comes produced underneath of that is far red. And just like Kevin says, it triggers into the plant to say, hey, I need to grow, I need to overcome, I need to reproduce, I need to go to the light. So the next day you'll come into that garden and you'll see that top has grown, several inches, and apologize for my American scale here, but maybe 10 centimeters or so, when the whole rest of the canopy is only grown a few centimeters. But that top is now overcame because it was getting a far red response. And I like to talk that it is very strain dependent. If you think about I find that indicas tend to really respond very well to that far red. And if you imagine where these indicas have evolved from geographically from, Humboldt County into these really kind of inconsistent lighting environments where they're growing up in the mountains, so they're not getting full sun all the time. They're, hollowed out shade trees just to get protection from a legal aspect. And those plants responded and have evolved over being exposed to large amounts of far red throughout their life, and have evolved with that naturally. Whereas sativa, you tend to only find maybe that far red response in the morning and in the evening when that long wavelength of light has to travel through the atmosphere. But I think that Andrew could touch on probably some very good specifics on what he's found on how to utilize far red, which I always find very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So, we got a lot of, we're finding a lot of the same stuff, guys, as far as the overshadowing and all that. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how we use our lights and the spectrums used and when we use them. So we use light shift fixtures throughout our entire facility and adjust the 4 light spectrums for all stages of growth, vegetative, flowering, and also for breeding seeds. For the vegetative cycle, we mainly use the blue and daylight spectrums with a smaller amount of red and touch of far red. The balance of blue and red drives photosynthesis and promotes short internodes and strong style plants, ideal for commercial cultivation. The daylight spectrum is key for light penetration in the lower canopy with a little bit of included green in there. The red and far red are slowly increased as the plants near the end of the vegetative cycle. So during the first 3 weeks of flowering, the red and far red spectrums are gradually increased to a high intensity. The plants translate the high amount of far red as being in the shadow, which promotes stretching and earlier flowering. Far red is ran for 10 minutes before and after the lights on shift, imitating dawn and dusk sun wavelengths. We have found this reduces total flowering time by up to 15%. After 3 weeks of flowering, far red is not used except before and after the lights on shift. This has helped achieve more compact bud structure. At the end of flowering, we use the blue spectrum. This triggers the plant's stress response system, causing it to protect itself from further stress, resulting in an increase in THC and terpenes. We have found this to be very effective when compared to tests without the blue light treatment. When breeding, an even ratio of blue, red, and daylight spectrums are used for most of the cycle. The daylight spectrum is used during pollination. And the ability to fine-tune these lights for each stage of growth has transformed our cultivation process. We are consistently producing high-quality product while significantly reducing our power needs. And like we're all saying earlier, we're always looking to experiment, improve, so we're always tweaking, changing, and just trying to get better. So.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
When you've used it,
Hey, sorry, go ahead.
when you've used it in the veg phase,
Yeah.
you've used it at the beginning and at the end? Is that what you said?
No. So and how I use the far red in flowering, or yeah. So we use we run far red for 10 minutes before and after the lights on shift and flower. Yeah.
And Andrew, when you're talking before the lights are on and off, you're talking your 12-12 period. So
exactly.
So 10 minutes before it officially turns on, say 8 a.m., then
right.
You'd run that far red. Do you do that at full intensity there at the beginning, and then you shut it off, and then you'll do another 10 minutes then at the end of the photo period? So
exactly.
Okay. In essential photo period's 12 hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah. I should have clarified that. Yeah. So there's an extra 10 minutes before and after that 12 hours. Yep, exactly.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. We at the Grove, we did almost like exactly what you're doing there. The only difference is that I was trying to be, because of the light we had, was so fine tunable that I actually would bring that far red in at a very low scale, and I would ramp it up as though the sun was coming over the hillside, and I would ramp it up 15 minutes until it was at full intensity, and then go into the 12-12.
Got it.
We did exactly the same thing, and then I would ramp it back out the same way. And I got so specific with it, I would tailor it out, and just, it would go from 100% to 90% to 80% to, when I would just tailor it out the whole way. So we did pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, no, that's just making it even more custom.
And I liked when, working with you guys, and I think it's really important for, the growers that we have. And we have several growers that have a lot of experience tuning into this webinar as well, so that I'm sure have very valuable input. But, when you're doing these sort of this research and understanding, okay, research and production facilities don't necessarily go hand in hand. So how far can you push this? How narrowed down do you do a smaller area of research? But I think the most important is, taking data points, making notes, making small adjustments, and so you can truly figure out what that change did. Because if you go and start changing all of these different parameters with light, with when you're doing your far red, but then you're changing your environment along with that, how can you really tell what's really achieving that final step within your product? So taking really in-depth notes, starting small, making sure that you kind of have a control group to be able to compare with, and then being able to make sure that it's scalable, I think, is one of the most important. Make sure it's scalable and it's repeatable. But yeah, I think that's really important to be able to mention with this. And also, it just seems that the sense is that we're all trying to mimic nature within these whole processes. That you guys have both mentioned, that we talk kind of about the Emerson effect with far red, and how those long wavelengths of light in the spectrum, reasons why sunsets and sunrises are red, due to the only long wavelengths of light being able to travel through it. And thus the plant being exposed to these far red early in the morning and later on in the evening. And a pretty good approach that I talk with all the growers on how to start, but making sure they start small and then just taking data to be able to control that.
Yeah, good point. We're actually working on building a smaller, more of a research style operation in one of our other buildings, based on the fact that, at large scale, when I'm dealing with 3,000 plants in a room, can't keep that kind of information. There's just too much variables. And it's, at full scale production, you just can't be as hands-on as you would like to be at a small research facility. So we're building a smaller confined area that I can test very specific blues, specific reds, specific, different spectrums, so that we can get a little bit more information. And I know there's a few companies and a few people out there doing that, but it's, it's something that's fun to do, and so we're going to do it as well.
Especially for your specific strains.
Specific
Some
strains.
hybrids really benefit from knowing more about them.
Yep.
Andrew, you touched on a little bit of that blue light exposure, and I've talked with some growers of increasing that secondary metabolite production. Kevin, I know you have a lot of experience with some blue light treatments. Can you do you want to touch on a lot of those? I was curious, Andrew, are you doing just the pure blue light? Are you doing a combination of the blue and the white?
We're putting in about 10% daylight with that on full blue, and we've tried 2 days, 3 days, up to 9 days of that blue. just to see, you know, if we're stressing them out too much and they're throwing bananas or whatever. But we found it to be super effective at about a week, and that's just kind of what works in our schedule. But like I said, anywhere from 5 to 9 days. I mean, it's increased our terpenes upwards of 50% on some strains. So it's obviously strain specific.
Yeah, and we found very similar results. I tried, you know, once again going that little extra step and bringing blues in over the course of getting more extreme towards the end of the cycle, where at the very last 3 days I was running nothing but blue, nothing else but blue, and you know, as intense as we can get it, just to really get that stress response. And we did notice quite a bit of different, you know, profiles. Very interesting to change. It's what we really want to know is, you know, there's just all the different spectrums and the different responses that each plant has to those spectrums. Wood driving blue versus red versus, you know, different spectrum changes, and at what time length that you need those to really elicit a very specific profile. And that's really kind of what we'd like to see, is the ability to find very specialized, if I just want more pinene, or I want more, you know, any particular value, exactly what amount of what color will elicit that. And that's something that I think is very interesting. You know, a lot of changes coming.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, more and more research, yeah, you know, more and more research needs to be done, you know, with more and more scientific data combining. You know, it is a light hungry crop. You know, we all know that, you know, typically the more photons that we put onto it, the more yield that you're going to get out of it. Obviously, that has to work hand in hand with your, you know, VPD, your CO2. All of those important parameters are very important in that whole process. But more research definitely needs to be done, and also just the limitations of cannabis being a light hungry plant. It does have, you know, plants are, you know, they're not unique. Cannabis isn't unique like in general other plants. I mean, plants can convert wavelengths of light, and that's the thing with LEDs is, you know, more research that we have, as soon as the, you know, technology still continue to be able to evolve, that we can feel more and more comfortable with the spectrum that we can provide, and getting all of the high results that growers were getting, you know, using their traditional legacy lighting. But it is a learning curve. It's a different feeling, you know, when a grower goes in and you run in your hotter room because you're not getting infrared light off the HPS. And you know, if I've, you know, walked into a grow facility and been in there, you know, and know what an indoor room feels like for 25 years, you go into an LED room, it feels different. You know, your first instinct is something's wrong, but usually if that's the way you feel, usually those higher, warmer temps, that's what you need to be doing to really drive photosynthetic production. CO2 is key, and light levels. So making sure that you're hitting all of those parameters are going to be all your driving factors to be successful when growing under LED or any technology for that matter.
Yeah, that's something that we, you know, early on when we started with LEDs, a little bit of a learning curve for us, you know, getting that temperature up. You know, we tried running different temperatures and finding different results, and as we get where we noticed it the most was because we were at 2 levels. So because we had the double level system, we were noticing that the upper level was always 5 degrees warmer than the lower level, just by the way the HVAC worked. And we were getting better responses on the top level. And so we started driving the heat up, and realizing that we were just getting a better response as that heat came up. And then we started running it around 82, and that left the top to run just a little bit warm. So we just backed back down a little bit and found that sweet spot. So double level really what keyed us into just how much of a difference that temperature makes.
Yeah, same here. It was definitely a transition in the beginning, you know, running rooms at like traditionally 72, 75, and run them upwards up to 90 on it, experimenting in the beginning, because Kevin, you were saying you're trying them above 90 just to see what would happen. And we kind of naturally found out how much heat was important, the same way you did. Our bedroom was upstairs and our veg was doing so great, and our flower rooms downstairs weren't nearly as warm. And yeah, just transitioning into utilizing these lights and just the environmental factors.
Yeah.
But once we figured
It's
out,
funny you say that for the, the 90 degrees. I've actually gone up to 120.
right?
And more or less for experimental reasons, for pest control, actually. So in the Las Vegas area, when we were there, pest control people use heat to cure and kill bed bugs in hotel rooms. They drive the temperature up to 120 and they leave it for 20 minutes. And that wipes out everything, because that heat permeates into every tissue, everything you can. So we thought, hey, if they can do it for bugs in hotel rooms, why couldn't you do it for plants? And if we can get enough water to the plants so the plant's not stressing out too much, and we can keep that low surface nice and cool, let's see if we can drive it to 120 degrees. And they stress, but they survive. And it was pretty interesting, because we put bugs in the plants to make sure that we could see what the response was.
Oh,
With everything.
wow. Yeah,
Well,
that's
very
cool.
interesting, a lot of things to come around.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is you have to start with your plan. Ideally, you have your recipe, you have your plan, and then record your data as you go so that you know what actually happened. In the case of, your lights and your temperatures and environment have to pretty much match, so you know what you have going on there.
Yeah,
Question.
I think a lot of, I think it's hard for a lot of people coming from hide lighting to really, like Brian was saying, you walk into a room and you just feel this is too warm, maybe, but you got to remember that, the general species comes from a high humid, environment, high heat, and outdoors, and we in Humboldt County, we're growing outdoors, it gets over 100 degrees, and so the plants handle it. Obviously, leaf temperature is going to be cooler because of the wind blowing through the leaves and everything else if you're outdoor, but your outdoor plants, it'll get to 100 degrees and they do just fine. So.
Yeah, it definitely took a second, not just the environmental factor, but just knowing, hey, I have a 635 watt light and I'm trying to achieve the same, the same production that in your head that you were getting for years with HID lighting, and but less is more.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, that's when I work with growers, and having yourself a good light meter, especially at those beginning times, so you can really evaluate your issues, see what the light levels that your plant really likes, making sure that you're working with, a manufacturer that provides you with a light plan, and then kind of sticking with that light plan, because LEDs are very focused. So it's very important, when creating those light plans, we're not asking for those details or anything for just the fun of it to understand your system, but we really want to provide photons in the right spot with the right quality and the right quantity of light. And if you say that you want your canopy is going to be this high, we're going to provide you with the right amount of micromoles, obviously at that level. So I think that it's sometimes the bigger a tougher adjustment for the HID growers, just the way the overlapping of other lights, you throw them up on the ceiling and you kind of just take for granted the plant kind of grows into its space. And so there is that learning curve of, what are those light levels? Like you said, you can run a little bit lower light levels and get higher results, because, not all of those wavelengths under the HPS light are absorbed by the plant. They're actually doing a little bit more detrimental things to the plant. So it's just an important thing to remember. Light meter is a really great tool when you're making that transition, and a proper light meter that reads LEDs because they're not all the same.
Yep.
Nice, you guys. That's a good session. You got into some good topics there. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Are you guys open for some Q&A right now? Does that feel good to y'all, or anyone want to get some topics off the top of their head they might have right now? We got some good questions coming in. All right. Yeah, let's jump into that. As a reminder, everyone, you can hit the questions tab over there and let us have it. Let's hear what you're thinking. Rather than reading a lot of them off right now, actually, to segue into what we were just talking about, I'm seeing a lot of questions about blue spectrum specific use and how that relates even to UV. And Ryan, I know we've talked a lot about that, riding the line, the different kinds of responses, and being able to have, you know, the bulk of the same effect in the blue spectrum as you can with UV. It'd be nice to hear you guys touch on that because I'm sure probably 8 to 10 of the questions around blue UV will be touched there. And then also we're getting some touch on green light. Kevin, you mentioned that earlier. Didn't think that green light did much in the past. People are asking some specifics around that. Can you guys work on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, green light specific, you know, it's, we use green lights in the grow room because it doesn't, in the past, everybody thought that, you know, the green light would just hit that plant surface, reflect off. That's why you see the green light, the green color, and it didn't really do a whole lot for the plant. But what we found is that green light is, it elicits a response as well. It really is, it doesn't, like with your far red or your amber or blue spectrum, it doesn't promote a stress value to it, and it doesn't promote a flowering. So where your far red may kind of help promote that flowering, and your late blue may really promote more of you know, more of a squatty plant, or you know, that late flowering kind of almost like a UV effect, like people talk about. The green light really penetrates deep into the plant and penetrates lower into the plant, similar to the far red, and just really helps kind of. It's basically just very similar to white light, where it just really helps to promote growth. It promotes inside growth, helps that A and B production, and we just found that green light's very helpful, but it doesn't. You can use it indoors with the light in the dark because it doesn't really elicit any real response from the plants as far as terpene profile.
Yeah, and I think you know, when Kevin mentions, and you touched on it, a lot of times when we refer to green light, a lot of times we're just referring to the white light. That, you know, green light is naturally what we all see within the light spectrum curve, and why you know, there's advantages of having, you know, white light or green light within, you know, within your lamp, because obviously you're humanized. So when you go into your grow room, you know, you can actually start to see the kind of what we feel is the true color of the actual crop to be able to evaluate deficiencies. You know, that green light does significantly help with canopy penetration. Traditionally, a lot of these LEDs on the market very early on were just red and blue lights, you know, or the blurple, as you said. You know, we were one of the first LED companies to actually offer green light. You know, we've done a lot of in-house research with our plant scientists to see these benefits of green light and white light within the fixture. So now more and more fixtures you have started to see going to more of a greener or white style of light. But also within that green spectrum, there are other benefits, you know, and we're finding does that white light or do those colors in between red and blue, do those help drive secondary metabolite production? Similar to, looking at chlorophyll, and determining that most of that it's majority of blue and red pigment, or blue and red light that's been absorbed. Are we finding, can we do the same and find that what is those secondary metabolites, what colors of those are actually made up, which there is a lot of results pointing to the benefits of having that white light and driving secondary metabolite production. Also having that little bit of orange and yellow, or we're finding, can help transition some of the, of the previous market and legacy growers using, HID technology, that maybe that orange and yellow can help drive transpiration similar to, the infrared. Now the UV question, I think, and then the blue light, there's a lot of research that we're still all trying to understand of UV, how it's actually used. Is it going to increase those secondary metabolite productions like cannabinoids? We're finding that research is pointing to that, but we are finding that we, as both of, Kevin and Andrew had mentioned, that, finding that we've been able to increase that secondary metabolite production with just blue light. Now, understanding that blue light's very close to UV on the actual spectrum, but blue light is doing, it is going through a photo repair. It is repairing the crop to allow it to produce those secondary metabolites, where UV can be a stress, a stress that can increase that secondary metabolite production. It's something that I think that the whole community is watching very closely. Obviously, UV has other benefits as far as some pathogen control, depending on whether you're talking UVA, B, and C, and which form that you're using. But there's also other disadvantages, that UV breaks down plastic. UV can potentially be very harmful for employees and workers. So the research that we're trying to see is, can we achieve this without having lawsuits or people getting skin cancers or damaging their eyes due to the use of UV, but something I think we're all going to be paying very close attention to in the upcoming years.
Yeah, you guys. Oh, sorry, Kevin. You guys both hit the nail on the head. As far as green and how the daylight is penetrating for that. And as far as the UV, the blue, I mean, we're finding through research is close enough to that UV, and we've actually tried using UV bulbs in a couple of tests for finishing, and we haven't seen any changes, but we're continuing to experiment with them.
Yeah, same here. We've played around and dabbled with UV, everything from just straight UV pulsing, different types of uses for that, and we found that the far blue, that blue light is really achieving a very close, similar response. And UV is, there's a lot of research now looking at THC as a potential sunscreen. Kind of sunscreen for the plant, and there's even 2 or 3 companies now that are using THC as a natural form of sunscreen for people. They're starting to produce this. So the question, once again, we go back to, there's more questions than we have answers for, is the UV really increasing THC levels based on its as that UV comes into the plant, does that plant elicit a response of, hey, I'm getting a lot of UV, I need to protect myself, and it produces more THC. So those are some of the questions that, and then just like the green light as well, questions that we have more questions to.
Yeah, great
Yeah, I'd like to mention, we've touched on it several times, that geographical location of understanding where these plants have evolved around. The theory of UV is, that we find these sativas that have very high amounts of THC. How did they evolve? How did they get to that high amounts of THC? And we talk that, is it because they grew up in an equatorial region, with high exposure to UV constantly? And we find, okay, are we finding that's why the indicas respond well to far red, because of geographically they're up in those hills, so naturally, and you start to see, okay, how did CBD start to evolve, or these low THC strains, which started to pop up into these, Northern California areas, where there wasn't a lot of UV typically within the atmosphere, or at least not larger exposures of it. Again, we're just kind of finding out this research, why we should be utilizing it, and why these plants have evolved like they are, and utilizing light to grow them the most efficiently as possible. If we can provide the right light for the plant, then the plant can actually focus on producing those secondary metabolites. It can focus on, becoming more resistant to bugs and mold, rather than protecting itself from other light or converting wavelengths of light internally, which is what it's doing under, HID lighting.
Nice. Great. Speaking of evolution, seeds are a big component of that. And got an interesting question coming in here about using spectrum specifically for seed ripening and breeding projects. Can y'all touch on that?
Like I said earlier, we've only used an even ratio of the blue, red, and white. No far red experimenting yet. Just like Kevin was bringing up earlier, space is so limited. We're in production. We'd like to have a lot more testing area, but it costs money, and we're trying to make money. So we'd like to do more testing with that going into the future. And we know genetics and seeds in the future are going to be a thing, and that's something we're trying to, get into. We got to figure out all the other stuff first.
Yeah, I think, just touching on that a little bit, if you look at kind of the natural response when seeds are growing, seeds are generally, when they get laid down and by a plant, they're low. They're already in that low space, that shaded location. And it would just make sense to me, that a far red spectrum would really help. That's kind of that elongation that they're looking for. And that far red spectrum is what they're naturally used to growing under early on. And so there's definitely some research that needs to be done on it.
Absolutely. Completely. And there's a lot of research. I was attending Cultivate, and that kind of a large agricultural conference, and listening to some of the academic speakers and touching on far red, and they were applying it to kind of basket crops, and finding that that they could apply this, and Christine could probably speak to this as well. But they were finding that they could apply far red onto crops and then send those to the store. And then once they hit the store, the big box store, the Lowe's, the Home Depot, the Walmarts, they get the same kind of conditions all the time. But they were finding that the crops that were exposed to that far red for that first period, for those 5 days, even before hitting that commercial market, were carrying on those characteristics throughout their entire life process, which I think is very interesting. Can we breed seeds that are used to having that far red to then decrease that time to harvest, give you more flowering tops? Because that was particular with this research. They're finding that those plants were flowering faster, they were having more flowers, the flowers were lasting longer, and it was just for that early exposure of far red. I think that we have a lot as far as, over these years, all we've done is, do these pheno hunts, and have searched for these, phenos that have worked properly under the technology that we're utilizing. And I think that that's where growers need to start focusing is, growing with LEDs. You should be selecting and doing your pheno hunting under LEDs, because it's going to be different, and you can be getting, we see these genetic variances happen through all these strains. that, you know, we should be utilizing the technology. We're going to continue to see that evolve with more and more growers utilizing LEDs and plants just being selected for growing for all the good things that we want, you know, that we've selected under the HPS, whether it was flavor, taste, yield, all of those things, but doing it under the right technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you touched on it a little bit there as far as just, you know, pheno hunting and finding the right genetics that really respond under LEDs. Because I have found that there are some genetics that just really respond well to LED. And there's others that, you know, they're just not as strong. And so as we roll through different genetics for our facility, we keep an eye on that, so that things that just aren't performing or doing well, you know, we'll pull them and try and figure out what the reason for it is, and hopefully down the road we can fine tune each one of these different genetics, because they'll all do fine under LEDs. I think once you just find that right spectrum for them.
Yeah, we've definitely found, you know, a variance in what different strains and how much light they can take, and you know, unfortunately, we've had to pass up a lot of stuff just because we haven't had the time and resources just yet to completely adapt them to the environment, and but in time. So.
Excellent. You know, we touched a lot on far red. We did touch on blue, but you know, far red is a fascinating realm of the spectrum. And I'm glad we're able to talk on that, but we continue to get a lot of really good questions on blue. And one of those is, I think, a more base level of how this responds in the plant. So like, what kind of specific stress does blue cause and why? That if we could touch on that again, I think that might help a couple people for the next, you know, 2 minutes probably. And that'll be a wrap.
I think that we're still trying to understand what's happening on a cellular level when we're trying to talk about blue light. You know, blue light is a photo repair response, so it does start to repair DNA within the actual plant. Now, is it repairing? There's a lot that goes into it that we're trying to figure out. Is it repairing that DNA? Is it allowing that plant to then focus on secondary metabolite production? Is the blue light causing a stress, which I don't tend to believe. I think that it is more of the photo repair that we're actually looking at. Now, we're also decreasing the amount of blue light, you know, so in general, there needs to be research that, you know, if you're pumping 900 micromoles, you need to be able to provide 900 micromoles of just pure blue light, so that we're still limited into the research. Because if we were to, you know, utilize the Elixia and drop away all of the red, that's going to decrease the overall intensity of your light. So is it a decrease in the intensity that we're finding that it's not breaking down that THC or the volatile, because terpenes are very volatile with oxygen and light. So are we lowering the amount of intensity, which is allowing that the volatile secondary metabolites to not break down with a lower intensity of light? So we're all still trying to understand what is happening in that internal plant level. I'm not a plant biologist. We fortunately get to work with a lot of plant biologists and more research communities out there in understanding what's actually happening with that exposure in that blue level. I don't know if you guys have, you know, Andrew, Kevin, if you have anything to touch onto that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it, you know, I think there is a bit of a stress response there. You know, in the blue light, I understand the rebuild, you know, section of it, but the blue light is kind of driving, that blue light going into that late flowering is kind of driving the ability for that plant to put on new growth, kind of driving almost as though, to some degree, almost as though it's driving almost like you're going back into veg to a degree, and it's stressing the plant out a little bit, putting on a little bit extra growth, because that blue light really helps that cellular growth. And I think it kind of goes to a stress response. It's similar to, any stress response, we find almost all stress responses, we find some form of a secondary metabolite build up for whatever reason. If it's pests, certain plants produce certain terpenes to help ward off pests. If it's sunlight, they produce certain things to help protect itself from that. And I think a lot of times, whether you do drought stress, whether you do temperature stress, light stress, it's finding what stresses produce what profiles you're looking for is really going to be where a lot of that research goes to. And I think that blue light, it really kind of does stress the plant a little bit. It's uncertain. It's used to that fall weather where you're that low sunrise. It's coming to the far end of its flowering phase, and it's used to that far red. And all of a sudden, it gets this massive influx of blue light that's producing growth again, and it goes through a response of kind of unknown what it's really doing. And we've seen a lot of good responses from it. We've seen terpene profiles go through the roof just because of it, because it elicits somewhat of a stress response, just like you would have from drought or temperature stress.
Beautiful. Thank you. We got to cut it right at 10 right now. All you guys, this has been fantastic wealth of information. Thank you for sharing and jumping on with us today. We've got a lot of great questions from the community. I know kind of lump them into categories, but we'll reach out to all y'all and respond with some more direct answers for you. And thank you for taking the time to be with us. Kevin, Andrew, Christine, Ryan, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the next one.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome,
Stay
guys.
safe.
Keep growing. Cheers.
Yeah.